breaking down Jeff Bezos's most talked about watches, the stories behind them, and the engineering that makes each one special. Because his collection may be worth less than you'd expect, but the stories behind it certainly aren't. So, let's get started. The first coveted piece in his collection is the one that completely changed Jeff Bezos's understated image: the Richard Mille RM 2705 Flying Tourbillon Rafael Nadal. For years, Jeff Bezos was rarely associated with watches that matched his enormous fortune. But in 2025, Bezos was photographed in Miami with his wife, Lauren Sanchez, out for a romantic dinner, and he was wearing something impossible to ignore. According to the Financial Express, his model was reportedly sold for $2.4 million, though its retail price is around $1.15 million. And here's the detail that makes the moment even better. For years, the extravagant watch collector in that relationship wasn't Jeff, it was Lauren. She had already been photographed wearing a Richard Mille RM07, the Intergalactic Dark Knight, a gem-set piece worth around $290,000. So when Bezos finally stepped out in something extraordinary, it didn't look like a man chasing attention. It looked like a man catching up. And the outfit made it even more interesting. A black shirt, dark gray jeans, no jacket, no styling, nothing designed to draw the eye, just a $2.4 million tourbillon sitting quietly on the wrist of the third richest man alive. But here's what makes this watch truly fascinating. The 2705 wasn't originally created for billionaires, it was created for Rafael Nadal. And that means this isn't simply an expensive Richard Mille with a famous name attached to it. It was engineered around one extraordinary challenge. How do you build an incredibly complicated mechanical tourbillon that weighs almost nothing and can survive the violence of professional tennis? The answer is the 2705. The entire watch weighs just 11.5 grams without the strap. Yes, 11.5 grams. Richard Mille describes it as its lightest mechanical watch, while designing it to withstand extreme shock forces. Only 80 pieces were produced worldwide, making it extremely rare. Its case is made from carbon PTB4, an advanced carbon composite produced from hundreds of layers of extremely thin carbon filaments impregnated with resin and stacked in different orientations. Inside is the manually wound caliber 2705, a skeletonized flying tourbillon movement measuring 32.75 by 28.95 millimeters and only 2.12 millimeters thick. It contains 22 jewels, operates at 3 Hz or 21,600 vibrations per hour, and offers approximately 55 hours of power reserve. And the star of the movement is the flying tourbillon. Unlike a traditional tourbillon supported by bridges on both sides, the flying tourbillon is mounted from one side, eliminating the traditional upper bridge. Not just that, the movement is suspended by 4 braided steel cables floating inside the case. The movement itself weighs only 3.79 grams. Even the barrel has been redesigned. It uses a fast rotating flying barrel that completes one revolution in approximately 5.2 hours, helping deliver more consistent torque throughout the power reserve. Then comes the number that makes this watch almost unbelievable: 14,000 Gs. Richard Mille says the watch can withstand shocks exceeding 14,000 times the force of gravity, an extraordinary figure for a manual winding tourbillon. And even the crystal has been reconsidered. Instead of traditional sapphire, Richard Mille uses a lightweight Lexan polymer with a scratch-resistant coating. It's just 1.2 millimeters thick, tapering to roughly 1/3 of a millimeter at the edges. The case measures approximately 37.25 by 47.25 millimeters, with the Richard Mille tonneau-shaped architecture. And these specifications alone make this one of the most brilliant designs ever created. But here's what separates this one from every Nadal edition before it. The earlier watches in the series were loud. Bright colors, flamboyant accents, watches designed to be spotted from the far side of a tennis court on live television. This one isn't. The textured black carbon finish gives it a kind of industrial elegance, and the skeletonized dial puts the wishbone-shaped bridge front and center, dominating the movement like exposed architecture. There are no diamonds, no decoration, nothing added for the sake of being seen. It's the closing statement of a partnership, and it's built entirely around mastery instead of display, which, when you think about it, is exactly the kind of object that would appeal to an engineer. But to understand why this watch exists at all, you have to go back further. This isn't a one-off collaboration. It's the endpoint of a 14-year partnership between Richard Mille and Rafael Nadal that began in 2010 with the original RMO27 tourbillon. Nadal didn't just endorse that first watch. He wore it on court in real matches, absorbing the shock of every serve and every forehand at full power. From there, Richard Mille kept chasing the limit. The 2701 arrived in 2013 at 18.83 grams, including the strap, using a carbon composite reinforced with carbon nanotubes and a baseplate suspended by 4 braided steel cables barely a third of a millimeter thick. The 2702 introduced the brand's first unibody baseplate, fusing the caseband and baseplate into a single skeletonized piece inspired by racing car chassis design. Interestingly, it was a construction method that dramatically improved rigidity without adding weight. The 2704 pushed shock resistance to 12,000 Gs, still balancing a feather-light 30-gram total weight, including the strap, while introducing Titacarb, a carbon fiber reinforced polyamide with a tensile strength of 370 megapascals. And then came the 2705, described by Richard Mille itself as the climactic conclusion of the entire 027 series. It took more than 4,000 hours of design work to develop, and it was built using a next-generation carbon TP-TB4 composite. So when Bezos put this particular watch on his wrist, he wasn't just wearing a $2.4 million accessory. He was wearing 14 years of obsessive engineering, built originally to survive the exact opposite of a quiet dinner in Miami. And that contrast is almost perfect. In many ways, that's what makes it surprisingly appropriate for Bezos. For Richard Mille, it meant creating one of the most technically extreme watches ever produced. And for Bezos, it represents something very different from his other understated watches. But as impressive as that Richard Mille is, sometimes you just need a watch that can keep up with you while you're traveling the world. And that's exactly where the Ulysse Nardin Dual Time comes on the scene. Taking the runner-up spot is the watch most closely associated with Jeff Bezos's everyday style, the Ulysse Nardin Dual Time. But for many, this is low-key for a person who has a net worth of over $200 billion and is the third richest person in the world. Yes, Bezos has access to almost every luxury watch on Earth, yet one of the watches most strongly associated with him is a relatively understated Swiss timepiece built around one practical idea: 2 time zones on one wrist. This model has a 42mm stainless steel case powered by the automatic caliber UN-24. It features a silver dial, GMT function, date display, small seconds, sapphire crystal, steel bracelet, and 100 meters of water resistance. And the specifications are interesting precisely because they don't sound like those of a watch designed simply to impress. There's no enormous tourbillon, no perpetual calendar, no diamond-covered precious metal case. Instead, Ulysse Nardin focused on functionality. The automatic movement keeps the watch running through the motion of the wearer's wrist, while the dual time system allows the wearer to track another time zone while traveling. But here's the feature that makes it particularly clever. The local hour can be adjusted forward or backward in 1-hour increments using pushers on the side of the case. So when you cross a border, you don't have to stop the movement or completely reset the watch. You simply adjust the local time. And that's it. For a frequent traveler, it's incredibly useful. For Bezos, it makes almost perfect sense. Think about the world Amazon operates in. Then add Bezos's personal travel and Blue Origin activities. Suddenly, a dual-time watch doesn't look like a random luxury purchase. It looks like a tool chosen for the life he actually lives. To really appreciate why this particular model earned a permanent place in Bezos's rotation, it helps to understand where the dual-time collection came from. Ulysse Nardin built its modern reputation on marine chronometers, precision instruments originally designed for ships' navigators, who needed rock-solid accuracy to calculate longitude at sea. That maritime tool watch DNA runs straight through the brand's later travel watches, including the dual timeline. This reference typically houses the caliber UN-24, an automatic movement built on a reliable ETA-based architecture and finished with 27 joules, delivering a power reserve of around 42 hours. Beneath a transparent sapphire caseback, the rotor and bridges are visible, a small detail that lets the watch quietly show off its mechanics without shouting about them. Depending on the exact configuration, examples have shipped with either a silver or black dial, diamond-shaped luminescent hands, a small second sub-dial, a big date window at 3 o'clock, and the signature second time zone display at 9 o'clock. Some versions came paired with a stainless steel bracelet, others with an alligator leather strap, giving owners the flexibility to dress it up or down. And that's what separates this watch from many celebrity watches. That's classic stealth wealth. And that seems particularly appropriate for Bezos, because he doesn't need his wrist to announce his bank account. Everyone already knows who he is. Its exact market value varies depending on condition and configuration. Recent market prices range from $9,000 to $12,000, and since it's discontinued, that number keeps moving. But the price isn't what makes this watch important. It's the choice. Because Jeff Bezos could have chosen almost anything. And let's sit with that gap for a second. The Richard Mille on his wrist in Miami was worth roughly 300 times the Ulysse Nardin he wore for years. 300 times. You could buy the entire production run of his everyday watch several times over for the price of one dinner table tourbillon. And yet the dual time is the one he kept coming back to. Photograph after photograph, interview after interview, product launches, conferences, Blue Origin events. That's not an accident, and it isn't frugality either. A man with that kind of money doesn't wear a watch for years because it was cheap. He wears it because it does exactly what he needs it to do. And here's the part most people miss. Ulysse Nardin wasn't built for people like Bezos. It was built for sailors who couldn't afford to be wrong. Founded in 1846 in Lou-Lac-Lou, Switzerland, by a 23-year-old watchmaker chasing one obsession, the brand's marine chronometers went on to arm over 50 navies around the world, including the United States, Russia, Germany, and France. Between 1846 and 1946, the brand racked up more than 4,300 chronometry awards, and at its centenary, accounted for a staggering 77% of every marine chronometer ever certified by the Neuchâtel Observatory. In other words, before it ever touched a billionaire's wrist, this brand's entire reputation was built on one promise. Get the time exactly right, every single time, because lives depend on it. That's the DNA sitting underneath Bezos' $9,000 dual-time watch. It isn't dressed up. It doesn't need to be. The precision was never for show. It was for survival. And yet, the watch he's repeatedly been associated with is one that doesn't need attention. It doesn't need diamonds. It doesn't need a six-figure price tag. It simply needs to work. And that makes the next watch even more surprising, because it isn't just another practical luxury watch. It's a watch that became one of the most famous timepieces in human spaceflight, and Bezos was there to experience it. Taking the #1 spot is the most significant watch Jeff Bezos has ever worn, the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch. On July 20th, 2021, Jeff Bezos climbed aboard Blue Origin's New Shepard spacecraft for the company's first crewed flight, NS-16, exactly on the 52nd anniversary of Apollo 11's moon landing. And strapped over his flight suit was an Omega Speedmaster. Suddenly, the watch wasn't just an accessory, it was part of the mission. Bezos, his brother Mark, Wally Funk, and Oliver Dayman launched aboard New Shepard, and watch enthusiasts immediately noticed what was on their wrists. The crew wore customized Omega Speedmaster watches with personalized casebacks and special Velcro straps designed to be worn over their suits. And the crew wasn't wearing just one Omega each. Every passenger was actually given 2 watches for the flight, the Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch and a titanium Speedmaster Skywalker X-33. And the symbolism couldn't have been better. Because the Speedmaster had already been to space, it had become legendary through NASA's space program and the Apollo missions. It earned the nickname Moonwatch because of its extraordinary connection to lunar exploration. So when Bezos entered space wearing one, he wasn't simply choosing a famous Swiss chronograph. He was wearing a piece of the history he was attempting to join. The watch measures 42 millimeters and features a stainless steel case, classic black dial, and tachymeter bezel. Inside is Omega's manually wound caliber 3861, a coaxial master chronometer movement operating at 21,600 vibrations per hour, with approximately 50 hours of power reserve and resistance to magnetic fields up to 15,000 Gauss. The chronograph includes small seconds, a 30-minute counter, and a 12-hour counter, while the tachymeter scale sits around the outer bezel. But there's one specification here that surprises almost everyone. The crystal isn't sapphire. On this exact reference, Omega uses hezolite, a type of acrylic, essentially high-grade plastic. And that sounds like a downgrade until you understand why it's there. Sapphire is harder, but sapphire shatters. And it shatters into razor-sharp fragments that float. In a sealed capsule in zero gravity, broken glass doesn't fall to the floor. It drifts through the cabin, into equipment, into eyes, into lungs. Hezolite doesn't do that. It scratches, it scuffs, it dulls over time, and if it ever breaks, it cracks instead of shattering. So NASA kept it. Decades later, Omega still builds the Moonwatch that way. It's a small thing, but it tells you everything about how this watch was designed. And that's what made the Speedmaster such an enduring instrument. NASA's testing history helped make it legendary. The watch survived demanding tests involving temperature extremes, shocks, vibrations, and decompression before being approved for NASA's manned space program. So when Bezos chose the Speedmaster for his own spaceflight, the watch already carried decades of credibility. But his particular watch had another important detail: the strap. Instead of the traditional stainless steel bracelet, Bezos wore the Speedmaster on a long Velcro strap customized for Blue Origin's mission. That allowed it to sit over his spacesuit, echoing the way astronauts had historically worn Speedmasters during space missions. The caseback was customized as well, featuring the wearer's name, flight number, and Blue Origin's insignia. So this wasn't simply a Speedmaster pulled from Bezos's collection and thrown onto his wrist for the launch. Its price sits around the $7,000 range, depending on configuration and market, but it fit Bezos's lifestyle and his space mission perfectly. Omega had given and customized the watches specifically for the crew, and that makes the piece much more meaningful, because the watch became a physical part of the mission, and it became permanently connected to the day he crossed into space. But before Bezos ever put one on, the Speedmaster had already proven itself in the worst possible circumstances. On April 13, 1970, an oxygen tank exploded aboard Apollo 13, crippling the spacecraft 2 days into its mission to the Moon. With most onboard systems, including the digital timer, shut down to conserve power, the crew needed to fire the lunar module's engine for exactly 14 seconds to correct their course home. Miss that window, and the capsule would either burn up or skip off the atmosphere into space forever. Astronaut Jack Swigert had no digital backup, so he used his wrist. He timed the 14-second burn on his Omega Speedmaster, while Commander Jim Lovell manually steered using Earth's horizon as his only reference. The burn worked perfectly. Days later, Apollo 13 splashed down safely, and Omega received NASA's Silver Snoopy Award, one of the highest honors in spaceflight, reserved for less than 1% of eligible recipients. So when Bezos strapped a Speedmaster over his suit, he wasn't borrowing prestige from the moon landing alone. He was wearing the exact watch that quite literally brought astronauts home. Let's slow down on that mission for a moment, because the details make the story even better. The flight launched from Blue Origin's West Texas site on July 20, 2021, 52 years to the day after Apollo 11 put the first humans on the moon. That timing wasn't a coincidence. It turned the flight into a deliberate callback to the exact history the Speedmaster is famous for. Omega replaced the Moonwatch's usual NASA flight qualification caseback engraving with something built specifically for this flight. The new Shepard vehicle engraved in relief at the center, first watch worn on the moon arched above it, and Blue Origin NS-16 along with the individual crew member's name engraved below, and the same treatment went on to the second watch. The titanium Skywalker received an identical caseback, engraved into the titanium instead of steel. Both watches were fitted with gray Velcro straps carrying the Blue Origin logo, sized to wrap over a pressurized flight suit rather than a shirt cuff. Omega didn't sell these. The company donated them to the crew, and the whole flight, from ignition to parachutes, lasted a little over 10 minutes. 10 minutes of work for a watch that had already spent half a century proving it could handle far worse. The crew itself made the flight historic in its own right. Oliver Dayman, at 18, became the youngest person ever to reach space, and Wally Funk at 82 became the oldest. But Wally Funk's story deserves a moment of its own, because if you don't know who she was, you're missing the best part of this entire mission. Her full name was Mary Wallace Funk, and almost nobody ever called her that. Back in 1961, she was one of 13 women who took the exact same physiological screening tests as NASA's original astronauts. She passed all of them. On several, she scored higher than John Glenn, the first American to orbit the Earth. She was the youngest of the group, and by most measures, she was one of the best. And then she was told no. The program was quietly shut down. She was rejected 3 times. No engineering degree, no test pilot background. Those were the reasons written down, and the United States would not send a woman into space for another 22 years. But here's the part that matters. She never stopped flying. She became the first female civilian flight instructor at a United States military base, the first female inspector at the Federal Aviation Administration, the first female air safety investigator at the National Transportation Safety Board. She logged more than 19,000 hours in the air, and she taught thousands of people to fly. 60 years after she passed those tests, Jeff Bezos offered her the seat she had already earned in 1961. She said she was going up for all of them. And when the capsule came back down, she was reportedly asking to go again before they had even landed. Wally Funk passed away in July of 2026 at the age of 87. So when you look at the photographs from inside that capsule, remember what you're actually seeing. One of those Speedmasters was strapped to the wrist of a woman who had waited 6 decades to put it there. And she wore it into space at 82 years old. Some watches mark time. That one marked the end of a very long wait. And there you have it, Jeff Bezos' most talked about watches. Each of these watches shows a unique side of his journey, from the Richard Mille 2705 to the Ulysse Nardin Dual Time to the Omega Speedmaster Professional Moonwatch. And when you put them together, a pattern starts to appear. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more celebrity watch collections. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.